Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tips, tools, and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Hey everybody, and welcome back. I hope that you can hear me okay. I'm out here in nature. I'm at this beautiful Spokane River today, and I've had a set of synchronistic events that have happened over the last 3 weeks, and I thought it might be beneficial for me to share my near-death experience story. And so, I've always been a risk taker, and I've had my fair share of skirts with death, so to speak. One time I was in Mexico and I was scuba diving, and I had rented some equipment. And when I got down to about 60 feet under, my BC filled up. So your BC is what you wear that holds the air in it. And when I went to tug on it to allow the air to release, it wouldn't release. And so I started to ascend to the surface. And for those of you that scuba dive, you know that's not a great thing because it could give you what's called the bends. Okay, so the instructor that was with me, or the guide that was with me, actually took out his pocket knife and stabbed the back of the BC to allow the air to come out. And so I did not float up to the surface. And then, another time I was traveling in Colorado, and I was doing an ATV excursion, and we got all the way up to the top of a mountain near Boulder, Colorado. And at the top of the mountain, a storm came in, a lightning storm. And so the guide was like, we've got to get down or we're going to potentially get struck by lightning. So we were, really hauling it to get down. Well, as we were going down the hill, I had actually hit a tree root, and it flipped my ATV, and it actually flipped it on top of me and knocked me unconscious for several minutes. And so, but the story that I'm going to share with you today is a little different because I had a little bit more of a spiritual experience with this particular, what some would call a near-death experience. And it might be a little bit different than some of the other near-death experiencers, but I thought it might be beneficial for me to just share my story today with all of you. So that way you can, maybe you relate, maybe you've had an experience like this too. And so this happened, it was 2 summers ago, probably right around July or August. 2 summers ago, and it was really hot. It gets really hot here in North Idaho in the summer, well above 90s sometimes. And so a lot of people spend time in the lakes. We have so many lakes, rivers, different types of water sources that people will spend time in. And so, I hear something. Okay, guys, I am in prime moose country. So if you see something behind me, let me know. I keep hearing something because the moose like to come down to the river and get a drink because it's kind of warm today. Just to let you know. Not like you can tell me or anything, but if I keep turning around, that's why. So, like I said, this was 2 summers ago, and it was really hot, and it was a day where I didn't have anything planned. And so I had gotten on Facebook, and there was a group on there for people in North Idaho to kind of connect and do things together. And so I had found a group that was going out to do what's known as floating. And so here they do things called floating. It's where you get literally a little float, little raft, and you literally just float down the river. And so I had never done that before. I mean, I lived in Florida for 20 years. I had done tubing, which is where you connect a cord to the back of a boat and it pulls the tube. And I've also done rafting, where you get on there as a group and you ride the rapids. But I had never really done floating before. So I thought, well, this will be fun. So I connected with a group of people I had never met before. And I actually didn't have a float. So I was scrambling around town looking for one, just a single float. And weirdly, living in Florida, it was really easy to find a float. You could buy one at the beach or on the side of the road. But here, it was really difficult for me to find a float. It was like they were all sold out. So I went to a sporting goods store and found a double float. So that's basically, you've got a float for 2 people. Okay, so it had a circle for, on one side to sit, and it was attached to another circle where another person could sit. So what I ended up doing was just sitting on one side and then putting all of my gear and my stuff in a waterproof bag on the other side. And so I met up with these people at their home, and I rode to this location with them, and they had never done this river either. So this is the North Clark Fork area of the Coeur d'Alene River, and that's not where I am today, but this river is very similar, and I will show you some of the little bit of the rapids that come through here. It's not significant, but when you're floating, it can be, you know, a little much. Well, we found our location, and basically what you do is you kind of one person parks upstream and another person parks downstream, because you're going to be floating down, and then you load in one vehicle and then you drive back up the river to unload your floats. And so we had done that. We got everything situated. We got our floats all inflated, and everybody was good. And we met a couple of other people there. So I had ridden up with 2 other people, and we ended up meeting, I think, 2 or 3 other people. And one of the guys had an electronic float where he was on it, kind of like a hover float sort of, and it was electronic, and he could bounce around in that. So it was kind of neat, where our floats did not have that. We were just literally floating on the river. And so, you know, we were having a good time, and we were floating, and the river was very shallow this day. I remember in certain areas I had to actually get up and walk, you know, to move my float, because this time of year it gets very dry here, and we are prone to fires. And so the rivers, that's a prime time to go floating, because there's not a lot of rapids that are happening in this area. And so, you know, as we were floating, we were probably floating for a good hour, I would say. We were probably out there for an hour, because I think the whole float lasted about 2 hours from where the one car was parked to the other car. And so we got all the way down to this one area. And now, I was not privy to this, but when you float, they actually use a rope and they tie the rafts together, so that way you don't lose one another. And I did not realize that this was going to be a problem until I realized it was a problem. And so, you know, we're coming down the area, and one of the guys is floating up in front, and then I'm attached to this other girl. And so my double raft is attached to her single raft, and she's in front of me. Well, we get to an area of the river where it starts to veer off a little bit to like a 45-degree angle, and we start to see some rapids. You know, there's some rapids, and it's going to take us around this corner where these rapids are, and then it's going to kind of dump us out, you know, on the other side. And so I didn't really realize how abrupt the rapids were until we started to really get into them. And so her raft actually turned around, so she was facing me and I was coming forward towards her. Well, as we started to veer around this 45-degree angle, I noticed that her raft had hit something in the water, and she started to tip a little bit. Well, then I realized that it was a tree. There was a tree up underneath the water. You could barely see it. It was like, you know, one little branch was kind of sticking out. Well, she was able to get up over that tree. She kind of just bounced around it. Well, that wasn't my situation. So, you know, her raft is connected to my raft with the rope. And as she started to pull around, you know, through that rapid, my raft actually hit that tree and bounced me off of it. So I went underwater and did not realize how severe the situation was until I was actually underwater. So I first realized that one of my feet was trapped and lodged into the tree. And then I realized that the rope that was connected to her was actually wrapped around my neck, and it was holding me down. So my foot was lodged, holding me underwater, and then the rope was wrapped around me, holding me underwater. And then my double raft was on top of me, holding me underwater. And then I realized that my bathing suit, I was wearing a one-piece bathing suit, and I had a strap, and the strap was actually wrapped around one of the branches under the water as well. So there was a moment in time I thought, oh shit, how am I going to get out of this? Like, I remember in my mind thinking, this is too much, you know, this is too much. And then at that moment, something happened and I flew out of my body. Like, I remember flying out of my body, and this instruction came through to me. This voice was coming through to me that was extremely serious. It was very calm. And it was telling my body, my avatar that was stuck in this situation, what to do. But then I realized in the moment that that voice was me. It was me. It was my higher self telling my lower self, my physical self. It was my spirit self telling my physical self what to do in the situation. And I could feel this calming presence. And, you know, I was probably underwater for well over 2 minutes, I would say, by the time I got all of this taken care of. But what had come through to me was like, okay, what do you do first? What is the first thing that you can free yourself from? And the first thing I could free myself from was my foot, because if I couldn't get my foot loose, it didn't matter if I got that rope, you know, unlodged around my neck or not. So I was able to get my foot, and I had these water shoes on. That's why my foot was really lodged in there. And I was able to free my right foot to get to a point where I could step on that tree and start to pull myself up. Well, as I did that, I recognized that that rope, she was being pulled. That rapid was pulling her, and it was pulling on my neck. It was tugging on my neck, and the raft on top of me was creating a bit of a suction. So by the time I got my foot unlodged, I was having a really difficult time kind of shifting myself out from that rope being wrapped around my neck. And I could hear this voice just saying, be calm. This is not your time. Everything's going to work out. What do you need to do? And at that moment, I kind of just swiveled. I remember I was trying to go one direction to get out of the rope. And then I realized, okay, I'm going to try to go this direction to get out of the rope. And as I spun around, that's when the rope freed. But when it freed, that raft came and knocked me straight in the head. And at that moment, my bathing suit was still wrapped around the tree. And so it was like just this one obstacle after another that kept happening. And it was really strange because it was like I lost track of time. I couldn't really figure out how long I was under there, but this very peaceful presence came over me, and I felt extremely calm in that moment. And it wasn't like I could breathe because I was underwater. It wasn't like I could take a deep breath, but I was able to work with my higher self and my lower self, my physical body, to be able to maneuver myself out of this situation. And then before I knew it, I was standing up, and you know, the water was very shallow as we were floating, but in this particular area, it was pretty deep. I mean, I'm almost 6 foot tall, and it was well over a foot over my head, you know? So I was thinking to myself, I'm going to drown with just a foot over my head, you know, in that moment. And I was able to stand up. And at that time, I turned around and I looked, and they were all well down the river because that rapid had taken them all the way down the river. So had something happened to me anyway, it would have taken them some time to get back to even, you know, help me in this situation. And so, you know, as I was going through that, I remember the moment my head lifted up out of that water, the biggest breath I had ever taken in my life to allow that oxygen back in my body. That's when I felt my spirit kind of come right back into my body. It was like I grounded myself right back in. So it's like I had this moment underwater of this disconnect from my consciousness or from my spirit. And then as I came back up to take a breath, that consciousness came right back into my physical body. And it was really weird. It was like I felt like this really strange sense of reality. And by the time I caught up with them, because my raft was connected to hers, so my raft was gone. All my items were floating everywhere, you know, and I just kind of swam to the shore. I got to the shore and I just sat there for a minute and thought, whoa, what just happened? What was that experience? And this was very different than the time I had knocked myself out in the ATV experience. This was more, I was very consciously aware of what was going on when I was underwater. But the sense of calm that I had experienced under there, and they were terrified. By the time they caught up with me, they thought I was gone. They thought I was dead. They said that I was underwater for a significant amount of time. They could see the raft over my head. They could see that I wasn't surfacing, and you know, so their experience was very different than my experience. And, you know, all of this kind of came up recently because a friend of mine had asked me if I wanted to go see some structures with her, because like I share on my show, I like to, on the weekends, we go and we look for different tree structures and stuff. Because I live in North Idaho, there's a very strong belief, very strong presence of Sasquatch activity in the area. So we do a lot of field research. And so where she had taken me was very, very close to where I had this near-death experience. And what I did not realize is, as we were driving down this road, I remember meeting up with her because she was on the Montana border and I was in Idaho, and we were going to meet up somewhere to, get together. And I remember as I was driving, I kept feeling like I was being pulled into the river, like my car. I had to keep, realigning, and I thought, that's kind of scary. I need to be alert. I feel like I'm being pulled into this river. And so her and I met up, and we left my car somewhere and we jumped in her Jeep. And we drove for a little bit, and she made a comment that I feel like I'm being pulled, towards the river. And I said, it's really strange because I felt the same way. Well, as we're driving, I look to the left and I see this beautiful mountain, but then I see what appeared to be a pyramid. And so this is also something that we're finding in these areas, are these very ancient old pyramid structures. And I've done some shows on these in the past. And so we drove past a little bit, but then we turned around to see if we could get a better view of it. Well, when we did, we pulled off to the side, and I was trying to take a look at it and get a good picture of what appeared to be a pyramid. And at that moment, I heard a little boy's voice, and she got chills immediately. She's like, "What was that?" And I said, "You heard that?" And she goes, "No, but I felt it. I feel like a little kid's presence here." And I said, "I know, I hear him. I heard him." Well, then we looked to the left, and there's one of those little kind of remembrance or memory plaques on the side of the road where people will often leave flowers or crosses or different types of things to remember someone. Well, there was one of those right next to us, within 3 or 4 feet of us. And it was a little boy. It was a little boy. And I knew it was a little boy because there was a little jacket there, a little boy's jacket. And at that moment, I felt like I need to help this little boy cross over. That's why he was communicating with us, because he knew we could assist him in this. So we helped that little boy cross over. And then we, took some pictures of that pyramid. Well, on our way back through to go back to my car, there was a girl, a young girl. She was probably 15 or 16, looked like she had just gotten her license. She had driven her car off the road and was kind of hanging off the cliff. And it was in the same area where the pyramid was. It was in the same area where I was feeling pulled and where my friend was feeling pulled, and also in the same area where my near-death experience was. So it makes me question if there's an area, there's some sort of an energy vortex or a portal or some sort of, energy ley line in that area that is causing a magnetic pull, And I haven't done much research on it, and I haven't been back. That was, I would say, 3 weeks or a month ago that we had that experience, but it sort of guided me to want to share the story with each of you, because this is something that happened to me 2 years ago, but now through synchronicity, I was guided back to that same location. And here I am sharing this story. So it's really strange how these things can happen and how you go through these experiences. And honestly, I think I may have just filed that experience in the back of my mind, because I knew I went through it, but I also hadn't really thought about it in a couple of years. And I remember that night after it happened, I met some friends and we all went out to grab some dinner. And I just sat there and they were like, "You seem weird." And I feel like it was like, I felt like I was in another realm. I felt like I was in another dimension when that whole experience happened. And then I was having a really hard time relating, with others after that. And it wasn't too long after that I was activated in my light language. And I've always had the ability to speak to spirit and speak to the deceased. I worked in that industry for many, many years, had lots of experiences, which I've shared on my show. But after that near-death experience, it's like those intuitive abilities really turned the volume up. And it happened within weeks, weeks after I had that experience. I noticed my clairaudience had kicked in more. I noticed my clairvoyance had kicked in, and just my overall intuitive abilities are much stronger after that. So, I'm not advocating to go out and have a near-death experience. That is definitely not my reality, but it was my reality in that moment. But it is something to be said for near-death experiencers that once they cross over, there is something there that allows them to activate these certain maybe dormant abilities within inside of us. And, it's not like I came back and saw the divine blueprint like my friend Steve. I know many of you who follow my channel follow Steve Nowak as well. And I've had a few near-death experiencers on my show, and they've had similar experiences, but yet very different. And for me, I didn't see the light. I didn't hear God. I didn't, have those types of experience that some near-death experiencers have, but I did have the hovering over my body. I had this connection with my higher self that I think was necessary for me to be able to connect much more deeply with my higher self in that particular moment. And it just really gave me this deeper understanding that, when it's our time, it's our time. And clearly, I've had these experiences where I thought it was my time, but it wasn't. And then I was guided back. I was guided back and said, here, you've got more things you need to do here on planet Earth. Because I think there's many times I could have checked out, but I didn't. And I was guided right back. And then I just kind of shake my head like, wow, what was that experience and where did I go, in that experience? And so if any of you have had similar experiences or near-death experiences, I'd love to hear about them. Please share, them in the comments. And for those of you who might be listening to the podcast, you might want to jump on over to the YouTube channel so you can see some of the beautiful scenery that I'm going to show here in a minute. I'm going to take a little walk down the river and show you some of this really beautiful scenery. And so, as always, I send you all so much beautiful, loving energy. You deserve to navigate your life in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.theexistentialempath.com.